Hi, so we're going to do a kind of a quick demo about sort of illustrative comic drawing for set 8. There's so many different ways to approach this, and especially if you are a person who does not draw, there are ways to achieve this effect without having many drawing skills. This is something that I personally don't have a ton of experience with. I'm more of a photo video person, but I always like to kind of play and try around with these skills. Being able to illustrate, kind of have like an illustrative comic type look is really great. A lot of people, it's a quality that a lot of people who are hiring want from employers or employees. So I'm going to work primarily in Illustrator. You can do this in Photoshop, and I'll talk about why I like to do this in Illustrator over Photoshop. A lot of my friends who work in this manner use Photoshop, and a lot of my friends who work in this manner use Illustrator. So it's a little bit of a toss-up, and I'll kind of talk about the pros and cons of each. But I'm going to show in Illustrator. These concepts will transfer to Photoshop. I'll also post a few extra demos that I find from YouTube that I think might be helpful. You could download brushes as well, which could be really a nice look and effect. So I was playing around with doing an illustration of an Italian cream cake, and I'm just going to show you what I was playing with. So as you can see, I pulled up my layers. Now, when you work in Illustrator, everything you do creates its own sort of sub-layer, but working with layers I think is going to be key. It's how you're going to separate everything out. So what I did is I found an image of a cake, an Italian cream cake, and I did a file place to just place it in. It's kind of a marker to say, hey, this is where it's placed, and I'm essentially just tracing over it. I found an image that I liked, or I took an image that I liked and I went to make it into something that's more illustrative, whether a client asks me for or if it's for a project. And so I always place it. If you double click on the layers, I dim images to 50% so it's not as vibrant, and I lock it so I don't accidentally move it. So the first thing I did was, and this is where you're going to being on your layers and locking the ones that you're not using is going to be real important. I kind of made this first shape. So I switched to my eyedropper tool, and I'm going to show you how I made that. So I'm going to make a new layer, cake test 01. Hide that. So I'm going to try showing the pen tool. So I'm just going to do this swap so I don't have the fill that I'm working with. And I like, and this I was playing around with cakes because they're not really hard, they're kind of soft. And I'm just kind of going around the outline. This is with the pen tool. And I'm just going to swap. And I have a cake shape. This was my first one. This is my second one. And over here it's a bit wonky. And what I like, and what Illustrator offers that Photoshop does not, is the direct selection tool. Double click on the anchor points and I can move those anchor points over. I can adjust the handles. I can play around. And this is why I say becoming comfortable with the selection and direct selection tool is really great. Because then I'm able to take something, and if I don't like it as much, I'm not having to worry about like drawing, rearranging. I'm just readjusting these lines that I've already placed down. Like this right here is a little wonky. I can delete that anchor point, do the plus sign, add an anchor point. And really just kind of play around. And I've got part of my cake. The next layer is I kind of add the inner side, so I'm just hide that. Cake middle part. Naming your layers is really, it's going to save you a lot of time. Something that I don't always do, but I recommend it now. I didn't flip it, so I'm kind of going to go in blindly. And sometimes going into Photoshop, maybe doctoring up your image, maybe adding additional contrast before you bring it into Illustrator might be something might be good to do. That way I can kind of see and add things. But the process is kind of working in layers with in different parts and kind of going back and seeing what the original was and going from there. And I'm just kind of, I had already made this image before, so see, I'll kind of do a reveal, kind of the coconut shavings, and I played around with some opacity, and I can hide this original layer. It doesn't have a lot of contrast. The coconut cake doesn't offer a lot of contrast, and it's something that I was kind of working with a while ago. So this is kind of one way. You see it's kind of got the blocky and boldness that a lot of comics offer, which is really nice. Solid colors and shapes. You don't need all that shading. I'm just going to go for this nice blockiness look. So I'm going to go to here because we're going to explore something a little different. So I'm going to place an image that I kind of worked up. Now, part of, you're not just going to find an image and copy it because that's someone else's artistic intent. You need to create your own humorous scene. That's part of the creative process that I want to instill in you. So you may find like a meme or something that you think is funny and you're like, oh, I'll just illustrate this. That's half of the work. So you have your image and you're just going to do File, Place, and remember it kind of loads up your mouse. And if it's smaller than your 8x8, that's fine, because the scale we're going to play around with. We're working in Illustrator, we're just using it for a trace. I'm going to adjust my artboard to fit this. Alright, so I kind of photoshopped this octopus with busy arms. And it's actually like a toy octopus and stuff. So I'm going to double click this dim images to 50% and lock it. So I'm going to use, instead of the pen tool, I'm going to use the brush tool. And for this I want to play around with sort of this big kind of bold line. Now this can get a little difficult because I'm drawing just straight from the brush tool. Now if you have access to a drawing tablet, this might be really nice. We have drawing tablets in our lab, so if you have a chance to stop by our lab, I definitely encourage it. But kind of just making my own lines. And what I like about the brush tools, if you double click, the fidelity and everything that you can set. If I don't like the lines that I made, I can always redraw them, but make adjustments. I'm going to make sure on this new layer, and I'm going to just rename this to outline real quick. So I'm just going to pause and put some more lines down so I can kind of show you the next step. Just took like a minute to put some lines down, and I'm just going to show you where we can just use the direct selection tool to modify things. Just a handle. And maybe I shift click both of these lines and go to Object, Path, Join, and it just joins those lines all together. So this is what it kind of looks like when you're rushing and you're just trying to get something, the basics down for the demo. So you don't want to do what I did, which is rush. And a lot of this is going to be kind of going on, looking at your lines, making sure they don't do awkward things like that, and really thinking about how everything works together. So I'm just going to make sure these lines kind of intersect. So do a Command J. So they gotta be. There we go. No, made it weird now. I'll just worry about that later. Sometimes it doesn't want to join. Anywho, so you kind of have an outline set up. I'll lock this layer, pick a new layer, and drag it underneath, and spell things correctly. So nested under the brush tool is the blob brush tool. So when you do brushes, it kind of places outlines down, a stroke, and when you use the blob brush tool, it makes shapes. just want to, so for some reason it doesn't want me. To make my blob brush tool any bigger. There we go. I think I was just selected on something that I shouldn't have been. Which my brush is a lot bigger. But I don't know why it's doing that. But essentially, you can just fill it in. And it's kind of like a coloring book. And I don't know why it's acting so weird. Let me just check into that. So I did some Googling, and I think my issue is, so if I double click, I had keep selected checked. I unchecked it. I'm going to make a new layer, brush, and I can make it bigger. So I think keep selected is still kind of wanting to pull on the last brushes, but I'm essentially, with the blob brush, is, and I'm just going to go, again, I'm just going real quick. Swiftly just laying down color. And since I'm using my layers, I know it's underneath. You can see my outlines. And you can build up color. You can keep it simple. And even if I go outside the lines, that's okay. And so I'll show you what we can do about that. So this isn't, while it's using the stroke colors, it's kind of creating a shape. And you can change the type of brush there too for your blob brush, so you're not stuck with the one style. So I'm going to zoom in. If I see where I didn't quite go over, you guessed it, that direct selection tool. Now over here, you can see where I have an outline. So if I do Shift B, you can just cover that up. And if I do Shift E, which is my eraser, I can erase what I didn't want. You want to make sure the other things you don't want are locked, but it just erases part of the shape. And just move things over. So that can save you a lot of time instead of like doing everything with you know, the direct selection tool. That may not be a good option for everything. Now something like this is going to take time and patience. Like before, left and right brackets to make something bigger. Now you can do this process with the regular brush tool with Photoshop. What I advise again is, and a lot of people do really great in Photoshop with this, and those people are typically who do a lot of drawing. on their own. So they probably have a nice steady hand, unlike me. The brush tool, like we talked about before, isn't as forgiving in Photoshop as it is in Illustrator. So if I make a weird mark, yeah, I can take the eraser tool out, but if I want to readjust those lines, it's not going to happen. So that's why I like approaching this in Illustrator. Then it's a vector object, so if this was for a client, I can size it in any dimension they want without worrying about pixelization and knowing that, you know, they can put it on anything. And you can get that painterly look in Illustrator. A lot of people don't think so, but you definitely can. But if you want to go with Photoshop, that's fine. You want to be very mindful of layers, and I think a lot of time when we work in Photoshop, Illustrator just automatically just puts it on, you know, a new layer for us, which is very easy, but Photoshop does not. So you can just kind of erase things you don't need, and then we can hide this layer, lock it, make a new layer, and for highlights or shadows, what have you. So when I put my layer on, I can see what I've worked on. And if I want to adjust things, I totally can. Like, if I decide, well, I can easily move it over without much of an issue. So just be mindful of your layers a lot when you're working on this process. And take your time, and I did this in, 10 minutes, and it does not look good. So it definitely takes a lot of time and patience. But this is definitely very fun. I'm going to put some extra demo links because there's a lot of other cool different approaches that I like to watch as well. So I hope you have fun. If you have questions, please ask. Remember, there's so many different ways to interpret this sort of style or illustrative style. And I'll talk to you soon.